So, how do we define basic education? That's the $1 million question. Well, literally, more than a few billions will be needed to make basic education tick and become the pivot for national growth and prosperity. What does success look like in 2030 Nigeria or in 2040? And how must our policymakers evolve to set our young citizens up for that success? That our public education system needs reimagining isn't news. That the technology-driven future of work in what is known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution must reshape all levels of education, including basic, isn't news anymore. That Nigeria is poised to overtake the United States as the third most populous nation by 2050 isn't news any longer. What needs convergence and innovation is what and how we spend valuable resources on. Today and for ages, the chunk of educational expenditure comes from the public sector and governmental budgets, be it at the federal, state, or local government levels. Most spending on education in developing countries is by the public sector. Public spending on education by developing countries represents about 4% of GDP and is almost entirely recurrent spending, typically 85 to 95% of it being on teacher salaries. Even in OECD countries, teacher salaries account for about 80%. Other expenditure items are on books and materials, on school construction and maintenance, on teacher training, transport to school, and school meals. In addition to domestic public and private spending, there is approximately 11 billion US dollars per year of official development assistance (ODA) for education, plus some significant flows of non-concessional external financing, especially from the World Bank and the regional development banks. The ODA tends to benefit middle-income countries in higher education more than low-income countries in primary education. Fragile states, large countries, and francophone countries tend to have the greatest needs but to receive the least funding. A high proportion still tends to go for external technical cooperation. Aid for basic education represents only about 4 billion US dollars per year. Aid for education, like aid in general, tends to be driven by historical patterns and geopolitical interests. Thus, European countries' aid for education is largely focused on former colonies in Africa, and US education aid is increasingly targeted on Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan. The share of education in total aid has remained roughly constant at about 12% this century, hence increasing as aid has increased. Other sectors have experienced significant shifts, notably health, whose share has grown from 11 to 17%. There are 5 possible objectives for innovative finance in education: resource mobilization, profile raising, improving effectiveness, efficiency and equity, supporting conflict-affected countries, stimulating innovation in education. Our education sector remains grossly underfunded. UNESCO recommends that developing countries like Nigeria should earmark between 15 to 20% of their annual budgets for education. Nigeria has fallen well below that line year after year. Only 6.7% of the 2020 budget for Nigeria was allocated to the education sector, of which over 85% would be used for recurrent expenditures, mainly payment of teacher salaries. The financial resource allocation to our education sector is nominal and not enough to address the challenges posed by our rapidly increasing youth population. Despite the government's intervention to improve basic education, most states have failed to access their UBEC intervention fund, citing a lack of capacity and the required matching grants as reasons for inaccessibility of the fund. As a result, billions of naira remain domiciled in the UBEC accounts, while basic education in Nigeria remains underfunded and in a state of decay. Funding basic education in Nigeria remains a monumental challenge. There are concerns about the teaching and learning outcomes of our education system. This poor financing of our education system has resulted in problems such as deficient infrastructure, dilapidated classrooms, increase in the number of out-of-school children, outdated curriculum, a lack of uniformity in teaching, and an inability to integrate technology and be innovative in our teaching and learning systems. These problems highlight the funding constraints that require urgent intervention. Hence, the following ways can be used to solve this funding problem. Re-engineering the UBEC fund model. The government needs to explore other sources to make the UBE fund sufficient to finance basic education. The funds raised should be managed judiciously to ensure internal efficiency and promote accountability, as this would encourage local and international donors to make more contributions. The UBE Act should also be amended to adopt a different funding mechanism that will make it easier for states to access the funds, doing away with the counterpart fund model. Competitive pricing for procurements. Efficient contract management will eliminate misappropriation of funds and ensure that supply of all learning materials and equipment conform to standards. This model has been adopted by other countries, such as in the Vietnam Secondary School Education Development Program, where funds are effectively managed for optimum performance. Public-private partnerships. The federal and state governments should make a conscious effort to increase the involvement of private organizations in developing the basic education sector through donations or undertaking educational projects in the form of corporate social responsibility in various communities. This initiative should be incentivized through granting tax credits to the private sector. Education Venture Fund, a funding partnership framework between the federal and state governments as well as the private sector can be adopted. These funds will be used to integrate technology into our education system, making teaching and learning in Nigeria technology-driven. Endowment Fund. These funds will be raised through donations from private and international organizations, contributions from Nigerians in diaspora who seek to make a difference in our education system, bonds, and statutory transfers with the specific purpose of basic education. Diaspora Bond. Using diaspora bonds to fund basic education in Nigeria is a welcome idea, as more Nigerians in diaspora desire a means to aid the development of the education system of the country. Nigeria's first diaspora bond raised $300 million for investment in infrastructure and was oversubscribed by 130%. To promote accountability and effective management, funds raised through these various sources for implementation of universal basic education should be pooled and domiciled in a special trust fund. Funds sourced from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation, charity organizations, local and international donors, Nigerians in diaspora, endowment funds, venture funds, statutory transfers and allocations, amongst other sources, will be pooled together to finance basic education in Nigeria. To prevent mismanagement of these pooled funds, it should be managed by credible men and women, as well as stakeholders in the education sector who are of proven integrity. These funds will be disbursed to all states based on their needs to promote uniform teaching and learning outcomes in all parts of the country. Getting it right at basic education level is essential, as this constitutes the bedrock upon which our entire education system is built. Solving this problem of poor funding of basic education will help achieve better teaching and learning outcomes. It would also provide funding for remodeling of our classrooms, reducing the number of after-school children, redesigning and reinterpreting our curriculum, training our teachers to help them deploy better teaching practices, and move away from the rote learning practice. Above all, this would equip our children with the skills and education needed for the jobs of the future.